Luther's like, I'll get you out. Okay, he's, I'll spring you. I think this is about 1523. I'll spring you. 1538, 1524. And so he organizes with his friend, Leonard Kopp, who was a councilman, but he also was like a merchant, and he had this wagon, and they filled the wagon with fish barrels, large fish barrels. And he goes Easter, like it's the night of Easter Sunday, he goes to the convent, and the girls escape the convent, cram themselves into these fish barrels, and it's a 3-day journey from where they are to Wittenberg. Halfway through, when they get to the town of Torgau, 3 of them are like, we're done. So they get out at Torgau, and 9 of them arrive stinking of fish. And at that time, the nuns had shorn heads, so they would have been filthy, really short, shorn hair, and haven't eaten or drunk for days. And they come in, and George Spalatin, Luther's friend, writes to them and says they looked really, really wretched, right? So, yeah, they would have smelled. And Luther takes financial responsibility for them. Hi everyone, my name is Suki, and I'm an author, writer, and researcher, and I'd like to welcome you to the Sisters of Light podcast, which is a production of Lineage. This podcast explores the lives of significant women in Christian history and looks at their relevance to us in our lives today. This episode is on Katharina von Bora, a nun who was smuggled out of her convent in fish barrels and went on to marry Martin Luther, the renegade monk upending Christendom. Joining me for this episode are 3 incredible women, Charlene Coutet, Aiko Ramdin, and Chingy Bloom. As we delve into Katrina's story, we pray that you will be blessed. So this episode is on Katharina von Bora. Probably, she's been referred to as the First Lady of the Reformation because she was Martin Luther's wife. She became Martin Luther's wife. She was born in 1499 to an impoverished noble family. And when she was 5, by the time she turned 5, her mother had died, her father had remarried, and she was gifted to the convent. She had brothers. But one of the reasons why young women were gifted to convents was because it was just financially beneficial to the family. So in Katrina's case, being a young woman, being from an impoverished family, young women, you usually had to marry them off with a considerable dowry, depending on your status. And so it was just easier to give them to a convent because you did have to pay to give them to a convent. You couldn't just, leave them on the doorstep. But what you paid to gift your child to a convent was considerably less than a dowry. And also, you paid to deliver them to a convent or to give them to a convent, and the convent took care of their education, their housing, their food, their clothing. And you didn't have to from that point forward. So you were really, parents felt that it was just financially the most viable option for them. So Katrina was gifted to the monastery at the age of 5. She grew up in the Marienthon convent in Nimschen in Ducal Saxony, which was very strongly Catholic at that time. And she, when you think about convent life is generally divided into 7 hours, or based around the 7 canonical hours of prayer, beginning at daybreak and ending just after, I think there's one at like 8 o'clock. And so those 7 canonical hours are when you're supposed to come to pray. Each canonical hour had a name for it: matins, lauds, sext, prime, right? And so you'd come and pray, and your life revolved around that. You're eating, you're drinking. And so when they weren't praying or eating, they'd be working. Most convents had gardens. They kept bees. And they studied. So being in a convent meant you were literate, whereas other women of that same social standing might not have been literate. When Katrina was in her early 20s, just down the road, there was the priory, which is the male equivalent of a convent. So there was a priory in Grimma, and Martin Luther it was on one of his many travels, either when he was coming back from the disputation at Augsburg or after the Diet of Worms, around the 1519, 1520, 21 mark, he goes through Grimma and he spends the night. And that was very common. If you're a traveler and there were no inns, you would spend the night at a monastery or convent. And so he spends the night at this monastery and he preaches to them from the Book of Romans. And the prior, the head of the monastery, Wolfgang von Zeschow, took sermon notes. He was just blown away. And he copied those sermon notes and he sent them by messenger, most likely, to his nieces who were in the Marienthon convent with Katharina in Nimschen. And Veronica and Margaret von Zeschow read this commentary on the Book of Romans, which is like sermon notes in the Book of Romans, and they're like, this is crazy. And so they gather together, there's 12 nuns, and they form a Bible study group. They have access to the Bible, which, majority of the people didn't have. They have access to the Bible, they study this, and they're blown away by it. And so their first reaction is, we don't have to be nuns anymore. And so it takes 2 years, right? From when they first hear, 2 years to decide we don't have to be nuns anymore. Then one thing that they can do is, in Germany at that time, if you're female, you could not just wander about and get a job and live on your own. You needed a male sponsor. And that male sponsor had to be related to you in some way. So it was either a husband or a brother or a father. So these girls wrote to their fathers and brothers and said, can you release us of our vows? Can we come home? And all of them said no. One of them, another Margaret von Staupitz, her brother was Johann von Staupitz, who was Martin Luther's mentor. So when all these girls got a no for an answer, Margaret wrote to her brother Johann and said, well, this is the problem. What do we do? And Johann tells Luther, Margaret starts writing to Luther, and Luther's like, I'll get you out. Okay? He said, I'll spring you. I think this is about 1523. I'll spring you. 1528, 1524. And so he organizes with his friend, Leonard Kopp, who was a councilman, but he also was like a merchant, and he had this wagon, and they filled the wagon with fish barrels, large fish barrels. And he goes Easter, like it's the night of Easter Sunday, he goes to the convent, and the girls escape the convent, cram themselves into these fish barrels, and it's a 3-day journey from where they are to Wittenberg. Halfway through, when they get to the town of Torgau, 3 of them are like, we're done. So they get out at Torgau, and 9 of them arrive stinking of fish. And at that time, the nuns had shorn heads, so they would have been filthy, really short, shorn hair, and haven't eaten or drunk for days. And they come in, and George Spalatin, Luther's friend, writes to them and says they looked really, really wretched, right? So, yeah, they would have smelled. And Luther takes financial responsibility for them, which there's no other way that they could have, And so by this time, he's living in the Black Cloister, which used to be the Augustinian monastery. All the Augustinian monks have gone because they're Lutheran. And Luther takes financial responsibility for them, and all of them get married. Katrina can't seem to land a husband. She liked this guy, Hieronymus Baumgartner, and they had this relationship. And then Hieronymus went home to tell his parents, I really like this girl, but she's a runaway nun. And his parents were like, are you crazy? Runaway nun, no. So he dumps her. And then everybody's married, and she needs to get married. She was working at the home of Lucas Cranach, who was a court painter. But she couldn't just be working as a maid. And then Luther and his friend Nicholas von Amsdorf are like, oh, let's marry her off to Caspar Glatz. And she's like in her mid-20s and Caspar's 70. And so she's like, okay, guys, enough. I don't think so.
Oh my goodness.
She writes this letter and to Nicholas, and she says, listen, I'm not marrying Caspar, but I have to get married. And either you or Martin Luther are going to have to marry me. That's just the way it's going to be. And Nicholas is like, well, I'm not marrying you. And so Martin Luther is like, okay, I'll marry her. And when they got married, they didn't...
Charming.
Yeah, that's what it was, right? It wasn't a love match. It wasn't anything romantic. But when they got married, and the story goes that she took over the running of the household, and she discovered that Luther hadn't laundered his sheets in a year.
Oh,
and
gross.
So she takes over the home, and he calls her Katie, And then he calls her Lord Katie because it's like when he's writing to his friends, he's like, Lord Katie says hello. I have to check with Lord Katie.
Saucy.
And then he writes to one of his friends and he says, I would not give up my Katie for all of France and Venice. So that's very sweet.
Yeah.
They have 6 children, 2 die. And she was just a dynamo. You know, Proverbs 31, that was Katharina von Bora. She would like buy a field and plant a vineyard and sell the produce and cook the food and drive the cattle to market and run the household. And she was just amazing. After Martin Luther died, she tried to make ends meet with the kids. And then one day while they were moving, because the Black Plague had come in, they needed to flee Wittenberg, she falls out of the wagon into a ditch. And she's severely injured. And 3 months later, she dies. And the historical record says that when she dies, her last words are, I will stick to Christ as a burr to a topcoat. And that was her life. In a nutshell. There's a lot more, obviously. But she was a remarkable woman who it just took matters into her own hands when she needed to. Yeah. So that was Katie. Anything that stood out to you guys?
The fish barrels.
Yeah. Truly.
Like how, like, knowing that everybody in the world who you belong to has said no, rejected you.
Yes.
And then you have this one hope.
Yeah.
With somebody you've never met, you don't know. And the means is that demeaning.
Yeah.
But you knew that freedom was the only way to stay true to your convictions.
Right.
And to stay in such smelly squalor.
I know. 3 days.
For 3 days. But that's sometimes the price of freedom. That you desire it that much that you're willing to sit in the mess if necessary for the truth.
I mean, if you look at what refugees are willing to do to find
freedom.
It makes me think like we have ready access to the gospel. We have, you know, our Bibles sitting sometimes growing dust on our nightstands, and you know, we have so much freedom living in countries where, you know, we have access to food, running water, roof over our heads, and can get so complacent with just how beautiful freedom is. And the ability to worship, you know, without somebody coming down on us or having to do it in secret, having that fear aspect. But these women, like they were fearless. Like they went out not knowing how they were going to be supported. Obviously, the ones that got married off soon, none of them had a love match, it sounded like, you know, but they knew what was practically necessary in order to have the freedom they desired to serve God. And they did that. And Katharina was like, well, very practically speaking, it's either you or you, whichever one, then great. But then she took over the running of the home and she did what she needed to do. She handled business, which I think is just awesome.
Yeah, she literally rolled up her sleeves and like dug right in. And I think the other thing that sometimes we fail to realize is freedom was one thing, but also that freedom came at a cost in the sense of living in a convent was like living in a little fishbowl. You get comfortable, right? You are fed, you are clothed, you are educated, you are safe. You've never, you've encountered men in passing. I mean, you've got maybe the chaplain is male. Usually the chaplain was a monk, right? In a convent, they come from outside. Maybe you see the water boy or whatever, but you are not living in a world where men are a permanent fixture, right? And you live a very predictable life of continuity and consistency. And then you learn this truth and it upends you. And you realize God wants you to go out there and preach. And yes, this cloister is a cage, but it's a familiar cage. And it takes as much courage to leave, like it's easier in some ways to stay in the cage.
It's a bit like Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah. And so for them to leave would have been, like, it would have been a tremendous decision, especially in Ducal Saxony. Ducal Saxony was very Romanist. They left at a time where it wasn't common. I mean, later on, it was common for women to leave convents, for convents to shut down, for whole cities to turn Protestant. This is early days. This is the 1520s. You know, even Geneva became Protestant in 1536, 1520s. So this was just not done. No other nuns had escaped ducal Saxony. Actually, this escape sparked others. And so they were the first to do this. And they only did it because Luther kind of egged them on. So I think they were really brave, trailblazers.
Yeah, pioneer women.
Right, not afraid to do something first, to put themselves out there.
I think sometimes as well, like their example that, it sparked others to go and find freedom in like manner if they were stuck in a convent. Because it just sounds, I still can't get my head around the idea of gifting your child to a convent.
Yeah.
It's like abandoning your child to a convent, I guess, in that sense. But then, I don't know, if you were that impoverished and you thought that was going to be a more stable life for them, it could have been a loving thing. I don't know.
When we talk about impoverished, you have to understand, okay, some people were very impoverished, but like, for example, in England, Cardinal Pole's mother, Margaret de la Pole, gifted her son to a convent. She never forgave him for it. He never forgave her for it. But the Poles were like, they were wealthy. She was a cousin of the king. So when they talk about impoverished, it means I cannot live as I am accustomed to.
Right.
I cannot give a large dowry. I cannot have 100 horses in my stable, but I can have 20. It's that kind of impoverishment when we're talking about nobility. So Katrina's father was not begging for bread.
Right.
But he wasn't living in a castle. He was living in a manor. You know what I mean? So you have to understand that, yes, there were some very poor people that gave their children to convents. And then there were impoverished nobles who were not as wealthy as they would have liked to have been. I think Katrina's family was that category. So then it is a form of abandonment because it's easier to do. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is just such a shame. And the fact that, I think it would make it very attractive when you read a sermon on Romans and righteousness by faith, realizing who God is and that somebody out there actually loves you, has prioritized you, has sacrificed themselves for you rather than your life being sacrificed to make your family's life comfortable. I think that's what's beautiful about the gospel.
Yes.
That it does fill all the gaps where, life happens. Things don't always go the way we want it to be. But in the gospel, all of those hurt places can find healing.
That's true.
And I think when we understand the sacrifice Jesus made for us, and we actually, for example, read the Gospels, especially the crucifixion, well, when I read it, I definitely felt, wow, God did this for me. Like, I need to do this for someone else.
Right.
Like, God calls us to be self-sacrificial, and like agape love is like the love of all loves, where you want to give yourself for other than, and you don't get anything back.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could talk about sacrificial love.
Yeah. Right. So we've finished with this segment. Let's come back. Let's talk about love, but also let's delve into just Katrina's life as really in many ways the First Lady of the Reformation. That would have been a really public role. So yeah, we'll be back for the next segment.
"1,500 years before Christ, a young child was born who would later lead the children of Israel out of Egypt to the Promised Land. During that journey, Moses was given the plans to build a portable temple which was used for more than 500 years. The services of this temple gave a vivid portrayal of the results and solution for sin, the redemptive love God had for His people. It pointed to the world's Redeemer, Jesus, the Messiah. Messiah's Mansion is a life-size replica of this temple. Come experience this sanctuary model as a tour guide expertly explains the history of the events that took place in the services long ago, how each step pointed to the work of the Messiah, and how the truths discovered there are relevant to our lives today.
Lineage Journey not only produces video content, but instructive and illuminating resources to teach young and old about Christian history. Lineage has produced an educational coloring book for people of all ages. It includes original artwork from Ashley Bloom, highlighting the various heroes of the Reformation. Each scene has a matching story, and there are also QR codes to connect you to the website for more information and to watch the videos. There are also fun facts and memorable quotes to accompany the scenes to color in. Designed for young and old alike, get your copy now at lineagejourney.com.
Welcome back to our second segment of Katharina von Bora's episode. And we ended looking at how she was gifted to the convent and how, Sha and Chingy were sharing how, that kind of abandonment would have really affected her. But then when she read the gospel and saw the self-sacrificing love of Jesus, that would have drawn her even more. And I really like what Chingy ended us with, just that idea of because Christ has loved us, so we must love others. And that was really beautiful. And I think during the break, Aiko, you were mentioning that you wanted to jump into another aspect. So let's go there.
Hearing her story, you just can't help but think of Proverbs 31.
Right. Yeah.
Because she was just seems like the epitome.
Yeah, she was. She was.
Proverbs 31.
I think in many ways she was. Yeah, the epitome.
Even, you didn't mention it, but in the summertime, she would wake up at 4.
Yeah.
In the winter at 5.
Yeah.
So
she woke up before dawn.
Before the dawn.
Yeah. She woke up before dawn.
Which is
always
one of the characteristics. But Proverbs 31, verse 10 says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." And I think often that virtuous woman is not what it actually means. The Hebrew is actually, a better translation is like a woman of valor or
I like
a
that.
daring woman.
Right.
It's not the valor, not the virtuous that kind of in the modern day we think of maybe trad wives and like well-behaved,
right,
good women,
right,
are
who know
such
their
and
place.
such. Yeah, it's a really different picture,
right,
in the original. But actually, I didn't know it. But King James actually commissioned that to be translated that way.
Well, we're not surprised.
Anyway, yes. But we see she's not just well-behaved. She's very capable, very daring. She takes risks, calculated risks. She's very intelligent. And just amazing.
Yeah.
Not what I am at the moment. I feel like that kind of links back to Chingy.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't doing all these things to be valued.
No.
Or to, because she was earning something.
No.
But because she knew her worth and she knew she was loved.
Yep.
And yeah.
And I think she was also just naturally gifted in these areas. You know, one time we had gone for, like our church organized like a couples retreat, and the speaker, we were doing just different exercises. It was great. It was really good. And one of the workshops that we did, one of the things that the counselor said to us that really struck with me, she said, sometimes in a marriage, it's not so much about the conventional rules, you know, because you think, okay, husband should do X, Y. Okay, so husband should take out the trash, your wife should, okay.
Oh, 100%.
100%. Right. So you've got these traditional roles. That's true.
Oh
my husband does the trash as well.
Mine too.
Like that, I agree. But
I do ours.
So she's like, sometimes we look at the traditional roles and we forget that it's not so much about traditional rules, except when it comes to trash. It's not so much about traditional rules, but it's about playing off each other's strength.
Yeah.
And I think with Katharina, she was, there was one time when she would sit down. Like one time she sat down at Luther's table talk, Luther's famous table talk that he had. She was one of the few women who sat down. Another woman was Elizabeth Cruciger. But, Katharina would sit there, and one time they were debating in Latin until Luther just threw up his hands and he was like, I've had enough. You run my household, you run my life, and now you've come here to run this table, and I'm fine, whatever. right? You just had enough. And I think she was just really gifted. And I think she knew how to play to her strengths. And I think that is what a Proverbs 31 woman is at heart. A woman who knows her worth, but also knows her strengths and knows how to play to those strengths. We are not all going to be strong in every area, but I think that was what I admired about Katrina. She knew her strengths and she wasn't afraid to play to those strengths. Yeah.
But even though he obviously stood up and was like, okay, I've had enough.
Yeah.
The fact that he did say that I wouldn't give up my Katie
No,
for anybody.
no.
It wasn't just that she just ran the household and was just this baroness
No,
of a
she
woman.
wasn't domineering.
you know?
No.
But she was lovable
Yes.
too, and she obviously would respect him, and they seemed to.
Yeah, she ended up as my Katie.
Yeah,
Which is it's really, really, really sweet. Like, even though the marriage might not start off in conventional ways,
Yes.
they didn't marry for like love, and I think sometimes the whole butterflies in my stomach,
Yeah.
sweaty palms
Yeah.
kind of thing is so overrated sometimes. The steady decisions can also be just as valid,
Right.
and you can find ways to endear yourself to each other. Because statistically, like those butterflies, that the newlywed butterflies last, I think at best 2.5 years. So all of that you've spent your whole life wishing for, seeing in Hollywood, and now I've got my white dress and or whatever color dress you want, and you've got your wedding day and la 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 la.
Yeah.
All of that you live and hope for at best lasts in all of its fluffy glory for like 2.5 years. Most people it's like a year or so.
Yeah.
It's character.
Right.
It's
What
character
comes after.
and how you work together and like what you're saying in terms of like traditional roles. There's times and seasons for everything. Like when I had the first 2 kids, I became so deeply overwhelmed. I mean, I was suffering with depression too, but I became so deeply overwhelmed with doing the laundry, and I just don't know what it was. I can put it in the washing machine, I can take it out, but that's it. It's dry, but it stays there. And I was just like, I just can't do this. And there's seasons where, Clive's had to step in and he does the laundry. We're kind of progressing out of that now where, he puts away our stuff and I'll do the rest of it. But we jump in and out. He will cook.
Yes.
There's times where I need ingredients.
Yeah.
I'm an ingredient cook. And so when it's time just before we're going shopping and I'm like, I open the fridge and like, there's nothing in the house to eat. I'm never without food. Like I can always feed a small army. But to me, I'm like, there's nothing in the house to eat. He will go and cook this most delicious meal out of, but we're opposites in the way those things are. And I think having the fluidity to be able to jump in and out of each other's world. In fact, not even jump in and out. You're in the same world.
Yeah. Your strength. Play
Realizing
for
that
your strength and your weaknesses.
you're in this together, and whatever needs doing, we're going to get it done.
Yes.
And there's
Together.
times where you need to build each other up and hold each other, accountable in different areas. But I think having fluidity in roles, I think makes for a much more enjoyable marriage.
Yes, I like that word, enjoyable. It's true. My husband's the same. When although the one thing he won't do is laundry. That like is just beyond him.
I think he and Adam are in cahoots.
Yeah. It's just beyond him. I think he's just incapable of doing laundry. But he'll cook. He'll cook, he'll look after the kids. Like if I have to travel or do something, he'll look after the kids. I remember one time, and this is like similar to what you were sharing, like my mother-in-law was visiting us and she was very ill and she had to be hospitalized. And in that instant, my husband just, he needed to work. And so I would go to the hospital with my mother-in-law. My husband stayed home. He worked from home and he homeschooled the kids and he looked after the house. And so we tag team, there wasn't this is your mom, you need to do that. Like, we were just, okay, what needs to be done? Put everything on the table. Okay, I'll be with your mom. And he's like, I've got the house covered, and so he'd drop me off at the hospital. I'd look after his mom and then he'd pick me up, but he'd had the house covered and we managed. He had the house covered except for the laundry, but we managed, and like you're saying, it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
You're not like at the end of that was a very stressful season for our family. Of course, it was unexpected, but we came out of it not like sniping at each other, not angry with each other, having to like have long debriefing conversations. Like we were good. We came out of it and we were like, well, that was done. And yeah. And I think it's that, you know, that give and take and that easy flow in a marriage where you don't have to like tell the other person, this needs to be doing, this needs doing. I mean, sometimes you do, but where you're able to step in and work together.
There's definitely a partnership, right?
Right.
Luckily, Ashley enjoys cooking.
Very helpful.
And it tastes lovely. But I think it's always remembering that, you know, there's no I in team. And whoever you choose to, you know, settle down with or live with, or you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. Like always seeing that you're always on the same team, it's the same partnership. Because once you're, you know, in conflict with someone or just trying to not work together, like nothing fruitful comes from it. And going back to what you're talking about character, we see in Proverbs 31, verse 30, he's talking about charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And I believe Katrina, like she had such a anchor in the Lord, and her principles and her values and her beliefs were in the Lord. And really for me, like when I'm at my best, it's because God is working through me. It's not because like I want to do the things that I do. I actually don't. But I remember that God gives me the strength and the wisdom and the resources and whatever it may be for me to then do what he wants me to do. So I believe that, you know, it's because she feared the Lord, she had reverence, respect for God, that she was able to then do all these amazing things that she then went on to do. And being that role model as the first lady, like setting a path for other women to think, oh, if she can do it, I can do it. And I think we should all think about what example we're setting for other people, whether that be good or bad.
Yeah. And you know, their lives weren't smooth. They lost 2 children, one in infancy, one at the age of 14. And they were devastated when you read Luther's writings. And here's the other thing. You have all of Martin Luther's letters about Katrina, to Katrina, but you have not a single one of her letters. Just because as a woman, her correspondence was not as important. But you know, we know from Luther's writings, they were really devastated when their daughter died. And yet they still clung to their faith.
I don't know how I feel about it.
I know.
One of them, he wrote like, he was so torn up and he says, I'm left as weak as a woman.
Yeah, that's right. He had a great way with words. But yeah, you know, I think that, you know, sometimes when you think about like, okay, Martin Luther was like a public figure. You think about like a speaker or a spiritual figure. You forget that they're human and that there's like human aspects to them. They grieve, they hurt, and so when you think about somebody like Martin Luther being, as he said, as weak as a woman.
His wife was not weak.
Not weak at all, but just that sense of helplessness and that he was vulnerable enough to share that with a friend was really beautiful. So what else stands out to us about Katrina? I mean, there was the other thing sometimes that I think about her that I've read where there are some people that say, well, she was so practical minded like Martha. I don't think she sat down at Jesus' feet enough like Mary. Which, you know, I don't know.
How would you know that though, right?
I know, but you couldn't because everything about her is secondhand. You don't have any of her. I feel like if that had been the case when she died, you know, she wouldn't have said what she said. I will stick to Christ as a burr to a top coat.
Oh, she wouldn't have gone in that barrel, you know?
Yeah, she wouldn't have gone in the barrel to begin with, right? But also there is this sense of sometimes, you know, we stereotype people. Like, you know, if you're like this or you're like this, that means you're not really spiritual. Or if you're like this, you're super spiritual. And I think we need to be careful about that, right? Because you don't know a person's heart. So it's really important not to stereotype. So I read that and I thought, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd be able to know something like
that. Something like that 500 years after the fact.
I think another thing that stands out to me is that, like, what would it have been like to have been Martin Luther's wife? He didn't have a very, cozy, safe existence, did he?
No.
So always being on the end of, and with children to juggle as well.
Yeah.
Like, what would it have been like to have been the first lady of the Reformation like that? It's...
And you have to think about Luther's personality. He was a little mentally unstable. So, I shouldn't say mentally unstable. He probably suffered from deep depression. He had a lot of mental health issues. And then if there had been a Twitter, Martin Luther would have been tweeting constantly. Like, he was like that. Just constantly, the equivalent of tweeting, writing. And not like happy, charming tweets, like offensive tweets. And she had to juggle all that, That would not have been easy. And yet she juggled it in a way that he would not give up his gaiety, So I think that's really a testament to her as just her personality. Because she was a tough woman. It wasn't like she had a soft, yielding personality either. Yeah.
It's interesting that he didn't go seeking a wife.
Yes.
But God brought one to him.
To the very end, he was like, I will not get married. Like, months before he got married, he wrote to George Speltin, I have no interest in getting married. And then like 2 months later, he's like, by the way, I'm getting married. That's how it went down. All right, I want to end with Proverbs 31:30. Chingy read it before. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I think ultimately, what matters most is choosing to fear the Lord, to live lives in harmony with His word. Yeah. Let's pray. Shah, can you pray for us?
Sure. Father in heaven, thank you so much for all of these. It's just amazing examples that we have throughout history of women standing up for truth, being courageous to step out and do things that was against the grain. And in the case of Katharina, she really did go against the grain in many, many ways, fleeing a convent and just being the woman that she became as Martin Luther's wife. It's very easy to overlook her because Martin Luther was such a strong and influential character. But behind him, there was this great woman who was steadily and faithfully discharging her duties in the home and also, in talking and discoursing with other believers. I pray, Lord, that you'll give us courage to step out where we need to, that you'll also help us to faithfully discharge the duties that you've placed before us, and that you would bless our homes and our families. And if tragedy comes like they experienced as well with their losses, it's never going to be a simple and quiet life, I don't believe, when you choose a life of service to Christ. But there are great, great, great rewards. And as Katrina said, with her final breath, that she was just never going to give up Christ. She's going to cling as a burr to a top coat. So I ask, Lord, that you would help us to cling to you too, and not give up anything that could, give up everything that could try and separate us from you. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sisters of Light podcast. We hope that you've been blessed. Before you go, I'd like to let you know about a companion devotional book that I've written, which you can get at the Lineage Journey website, www.lineagejourney.com. I'd also like to let you know about companion books in the series, Sisters in Arms and As Bright as the Stars. If you'd like more information about us, you can find more of it on our website. And also, please don't forget to like and subscribe.